The engine roared to life at exactly 5 in the morning, and Samuel Okafor gripped the steering wheel with hands that had aged 15 years in service to the Ashworth family. He winced as pain shot through his knee, the old injury complaining as it always did in the early cold. He said nothing. He never did. Today was not about him. Today was about the boy he had raised, a boy who was, in a few short hours, going to become somebody's husband. The resort spread out before him like something from a postcard, white marble terraces catching the first gold light, orchids flown in from 3 continents, a beach so clean it looked painted on. Staff scurried in every direction, carrying flowers, folding chairs, adjusting sound systems. Somewhere above it all, in a suite with floor-to-ceiling windows, Vivienne Ashworth stood in front of a mirror, already glowing, already certain that this day belonged entirely to her. She had no idea that 6 hours from now, she would humiliate the one man responsible for the very qualities she claimed to love in her groom. She had no idea her wedding was about to fall apart in front of 300 witnesses. And she had absolutely no idea who Samuel Okafor really was. If you've ever watched someone build their whole identity on being adored, only to discover cruelty was hiding right underneath, stay with this story. Hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Before we continue, because what happens in the next few minutes will make you rethink how you treat every single person who serves you without complaint. Now, back to the story. By 9 that morning, the estate was a storm of controlled chaos. Photographers adjusted lighting rigs along the beach. A string quartet tuned their instruments beneath a canopy of white roses. Diane Ashworth, Vivienne's mother, moved through the property like a general inspecting troops, snapping instructions at anyone who dared move slower than she wanted. Vivienne descended the staircase in a silk robe, her hair half-finished, phone in hand, scrolling through last-minute seating adjustments. She barely looked up as she passed 2 housekeepers folding napkins. "Where is the motorcade?" she asked, not to anyone in particular. "Being staged now, Miss Ashworth," a coordinator answered quickly. "Tell them to move faster. I need the car's position before the photographer arrives, or the whole beach shot is ruined." Outside, Samuel had just finished polishing the last car in the lineup, a vintage cream convertible reserved for the bride's grand entrance. He stepped back, wiped his hands on a cloth, and allowed himself a small, private smile. He remembered another car, decades ago, a rusted-out sedan with a check engine light that never turned off, driving a frightened 17-year-old boy to his very first job interview. That boy was getting married today. Samuel had waited a long time for this. He didn't know yet that in less than an hour, everything he'd waited for would almost be destroyed by a single moment of cruelty. From the terrace above, Julian Cole stood in his unbuttoned dress shirt, tie loose around his neck, watching the preparations below with the quiet stillness of a man carrying something heavy in his chest. Theo, his best man, walked up beside him, adjusting his cufflinks. "You good?" Theo asked. Julian didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on the driveway below, where the cars were being arranged. "You keep looking down there like you're waiting for something to go wrong," Theo said. "I'm not waiting for something to go wrong," Julian said quietly. "I'm waiting for someone." Theo followed his gaze and spotted Samuel among the staff, moving carefully, favoring one leg. "The driver?" Julian's jaw tightened, just slightly. "He's not just the driver." Before Theo could ask what that meant, a shout rang out from the driveway, sharp, clipped, unmistakably angry. Vivienne had arrived downstairs early, camera crew in tow, and one car was blocking the exact angle she wanted for her entrance shot. "Move it," she said to no one specific. "Now. The car in the middle, move it." Samuel, who had just finished arranging the exact formation the coordinator asked for 20 minutes earlier, limped toward the vehicle without complaint. His knee throbbed sharply as he climbed in, adjusted the mirrors, and began the slow, careful process of repositioning. It took him 90 seconds longer than Vivienne expected. It felt, to her, like an eternity. "Are you serious right now?" Vivienne snapped, loud enough that 3 photographers turned to look. "It's a car. Move a car. How hard is that?" Samuel stepped out, his expression calm, practiced, the expression of a man who had absorbed far worse in his life and learned long ago not to let it show. "My apologies, ma'am. I'll have it done in a moment." "You've had a moment. I don't have time for this. Do you understand what today is? Do you understand who is watching?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then move faster." Samuel nodded, said nothing further, and returned to the vehicle. But something in his stillness, the way he absorbed the insult without flinching, only seemed to irritate Vivienne more. She turned to the small crowd of staff gathered nearby, needing, it seemed, an audience for her frustration. "Honestly," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you'd think after 15 years of doing this job he'd move a little quicker. Maybe it's time we consider someone younger. Someone who can actually keep up." A few staff members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Nobody spoke. Above them, on the terrace, Julian's hands curled into fists at his sides. Theo noticed immediately. "Julian." "Not now," Julian said, his voice low and tight. He watched Samuel climb back into the car without a single word of protest, without a flicker of anger crossing his face, and something inside Julian's chest cracked open like old, familiar wound reopening. Because Julian knew exactly what silence like that cost a man. He had learned it from Samuel himself, 20 years ago. 17-year-old Julian sat on the curb outside a group home that no longer wanted him, a garbage bag of his belongings beside him, rain soaking through his thin jacket. He had nowhere to go. His mother had died 6 months earlier. The system had run out of patience with him at exactly the wrong moment. A beat-up sedan pulled to the curb. The window rolled down. A stranger, mid-30s then, kind eyes, tired face, looked at him for a long moment. "You got somewhere to be, son?" Julian said nothing. He didn't trust kindness. Kindness, in his experience, always came with a price. "I didn't think so," the man said. "Get in. I'm not gonna hurt you. Name's Samuel." Julian almost said no. Almost walked away into the rain out of pure stubborn pride. But something about the man's voice, steady, unhurried, asking nothing in return, made him climb into the passenger seat. That night, Samuel fed him a hot meal in a small kitchen that smelled like cumin and old wood. He didn't ask about Julian's past. He didn't lecture him about his attitude. He simply said one thing before bed. "You can stay here as long as you need. But in this house, we work. We don't feel sorry for ourselves. We get up, and we try again." Julian had rolled his eyes at the time. Years later, he would understand that sentence saved his life. Back in the present, Julian's phone buzzed. He barely looked at it. His attention was locked on the driveway, where Vivienne had finally climbed into her car, satisfied, unaware that her words had just wounded the one man in the world Julian owed everything to. Theo studied his friend carefully. "You've never told her, have you?" Theo asked quietly. "About him?" Julian shook his head slowly. "I never found the right time." "Julian. This is your wedding day." "I know. If she doesn't know who he is to you, and she's talking to him like that." Julian's eyes were dark, unreadable. "Then maybe I need to know something too." Theo frowned. "Know what?" Julian didn't answer. He turned and walked back inside, leaving Theo standing alone on the terrace, an uneasy silence settling over the beautiful morning. Something was about to break. Theo could feel it. He just didn't know how big the break would be. Inside, Vivienne sat at her vanity, getting the final touches done to her veil, chatting lightly with her mother about seating arrangements. "I want the staff seated separately from guests," Vivienne said, barely looking up. Obviously. Obviously, Diane agreed, sipping champagne. Though that driver has been a bit of a problem lately, hasn't he? He's slow. And honestly, a little disrespectful today. I might have HR speak to him after the honeymoon. Good idea, darling. Image matters. We can't have staff who don't understand their place. Neither woman noticed Julian standing in the doorway, having heard every word. His face was unreadable. Calm on the surface. But underneath, something had shifted permanently. Vivienne, he said quietly. She turned, smiling instantly, the practiced radiant smile of a woman who believed today belonged entirely to her happiness. Julian. You're not supposed to see me before the ceremony, it's bad luck. We need to talk, Julian said. Now. The smile faded slightly. Can it wait? We're an hour out. No, Julian said. It can't. They stepped into the hallway, away from Diane's curious eyes. Julian's voice was low, controlled, but there was something underneath it Vivienne had never heard before. You spoke to Samuel this morning. Vivienne blinked, confused by the shift in subject. Who? The driver. Oh, yes, he was moving too slowly, I had to say something. You humiliated him. In front of the entire staff. Vivienne's expression hardened slightly, defensive now. Julian, he works for my family. I don't understand why this matters right now, of all days. It matters, Julian said, his voice cracking slightly for the first time, because that man raised me. The hallway went silent. Vivienne blinked, certain she had misheard. What? Samuel, Julian said, his voice trembling with restrained emotion. He's not just a driver, Vivienne. He's the reason I survived after my mother died. He took me in when nobody else would. He taught me everything I know about work, about discipline, about being a man worth respecting. Vivienne's face drained of color. I didn't know. You didn't ask, Julian said quietly. You never ask about people who serve you. You just expect. For a long moment, neither spoke. Somewhere outside, the string quartet began a soft rehearsal, utterly unaware of the storm brewing indoors. Julian, Vivienne finally said, voice shaking, I swear, if I had known. That's exactly the problem, Julian interrupted. You shouldn't need to know who someone is to me before you treat them with basic respect. Vivienne's eyes welled with tears, though whether from guilt or humiliation, even she couldn't tell. So what, you're going to hold this against me? Today? I don't know yet, Julian said honestly. I need to think. He turned and walked away, leaving Vivienne standing frozen in the hallway, her wedding dress catching the morning light, her perfect day suddenly, irreversibly cracked. Samuel, unaware of the conversation happening upstairs, finished parking the final car and stepped back to check his reflection in the tinted window. His uniform was slightly worn at the cuffs, but pressed neatly, as always. He allowed himself a small breath, thinking of the boy he'd once fed hot soup to on a rainy night, now hours away from marriage. He didn't hear footsteps until Julian was standing right beside him. Samuel. Samuel straightened immediately, old habits of respect kicking in. Julian. Everything all right? Big day. Julian studied him for a long moment, the tired eyes, the careful stillness, the dignity that had never once cracked despite everything life had thrown at him. Are you okay? Julian asked quietly. This morning. With Vivienne. Samuel's expression flickered, just briefly, before settling back into calm neutrality. I've been spoken to worse, son. Don't make my problem your problem today. Not today. Samuel. I mean it, Samuel said gently but firmly. This is your day. Don't let an old man's bruised pride take anything away from it. Julian's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, wanted to tell Samuel that his pride mattered, that his dignity mattered, that today of all days it should matter more than ever. But Samuel's eyes held a quiet plea, "Let me have this one thing, let me watch you happy," and Julian, against every instinct, nodded. "Okay," Julian said softly. "Okay." But inside, something had already been decided. The ceremony area filled steadily over the next hour. 300 guests took their seats beneath white canopies overlooking the ocean. String music swelled softly. Everything looked, from the outside, like the perfect wedding. Samuel was directed, along with the other drivers, to a standing area near the entrance, staff seating, separate from guests, exactly as Vivienne had instructed that morning. Julian, walking down to take his place at the altar, scanned the crowd instinctively, searching. When his eyes found Samuel standing quietly near the back, dignified even in his designated place among staff, something in Julian's chest tightened painfully. Theo, standing beside him as best man, whispered, "You okay?" Julian didn't answer. The music shifted. The doors opened. Vivienne appeared, breathtaking in white, walking down the aisle toward the man she believed loved her unconditionally. She had no idea what was about to happen. The ceremony proceeded smoothly at first, readings, blessings, the officiant's gentle voice guiding them through tradition. Vivienne's eyes shone with unshed tears of joy. Diane dabbed her eyes in the front row. Then came the vows. "Julian," the officiant said warmly, "please share your vows." Julian stood silent for a long moment, looking not at Vivienne, but past her, toward the back of the crowd, where Samuel stood among the drivers and wait staff. "Before I say anything else," Julian said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent crowd, "I need someone brought inside." Confused murmurs rippled through the guests. Vivienne's smile faltered. "Julian," she whispered. "Please," Julian said to the coordinator standing nearby. "Bring Samuel Okafor to the front." Every head turned. Vivienne's face went pale as the realization of what was happening began to dawn on her. Diane's champagne glass trembled slightly in her hand. Samuel, confused, was gently guided forward by a coordinator, his footsteps hesitant, uncertain why he was being summoned into a ceremony he wasn't supposed to be part of. When he reached the front, Julian turned to face the crowd, his voice steady now, carrying the weight of 20 years of gratitude finally being spoken aloud. "Everyone here today came to celebrate a wedding," Julian said. "But before I say, I do, to anything, I need you all to understand something important. This man standing beside me isn't just my driver." He turned to Samuel, eyes glistening. "This man is the reason I'm standing here at all." The crowd fell utterly silent. Vivienne's hands trembled at her sides. "When I was 17, Julian continued, I had nothing. No family. No home. No direction. This man picked me up off the street on a rainy night and gave me a bed, a meal, and the first real discipline I'd ever known. He paid for my first job interview suit with money he didn't have to spare. He taught me that work has dignity, no matter what job you're doing. Everything Vivienne says she admires about me, my work ethic, my patience, my ambition, all of it came from him." He paused, his voice breaking slightly. This morning, Vivienne humiliated him in front of the entire staff. Called him slow. Called him replaceable. Talk about firing him like discussing what shoes to wear today. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Diane's face went white. "She didn't know who he was to me," Julian said quietly. "But that's exactly the problem. She shouldn't have needed to know." Vivienne's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling as she tried to speak. "Julian, please, I didn't know, how could I have possibly known?" "You didn't need to know who he was to me," Julian said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "You needed to treat him like he mattered, regardless." "I'm sorry," Vivienne said desperately, turning to Samuel now, tears streaking her makeup. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean." But even as she said it, something in her tone rang hollow, an apology born of panic and exposure, not genuine remorse. The crowd sensed it too. Several guests exchanged uneasy glances. Samuel, gracious even now, placed a gentle hand on Julian's shoulder. "Son, that's enough. You've said what needed to be said." But Julian shook his head slowly, tears finally falling freely. "I can't marry someone," he said quietly, turning back to Vivienne, whose kindness depends on who's watching. The silence that followed was the loudest sound Vivienne had ever heard in her life. Diane rose from her seat, attempting damage control. "This is absurd, Julian, surely we can discuss this privately." "There's nothing left to discuss," Julian said gently but firmly. He turned to Samuel, and in front of 300 stunned guests, he embraced the man who had raised him, truly raised him, long before any wedding invitation had ever been printed. "Thank you," Julian whispered against Samuel's shoulder, "for everything." Samuel, overwhelmed, could only nod, his own eyes wet with tears he rarely allowed himself to show. Together, the two men turned and walked down the aisle, past 300 silent witnesses, past a bride left standing utterly alone at the altar in her beautiful white dress, the weight of her own words finally catching up to her. If this story moved you, take a second to like this video and drop a comment telling us, would you have done what Julian did? Walking away from love because of how someone treats the people the world overlooks? Let us know below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one. Months passed. The scandal of the wedding rippled through social circles for weeks, then slowly faded, as scandals do. Vivienne, true to old habits, was seen months later dismissing a new hotel employee with the exact same cold entitlement she'd shown Samuel, proof, perhaps, that some lessons only cost you something when you're forced to face them, not when you genuinely learn from them. Julian, meanwhile, rebuilt his relationship with Samuel deeper than ever before. At a business conference months later, accepting an award for his company's growth, Julian stood at the podium and said simply, "They say behind every successful man is someone who believed in him first. For me, that man is Samuel Okafor, the father I chose, and the one who chose me first, long before I deserved it." The crowd rose in applause. Samuel, sitting in the front row this time, not standing at the back, not stationed with staff, but seated with honor, wiped away a single tear. Julian later started a foundation in Samuel's name, funding mentorship programs for teenagers aging out of foster care, giving them exactly what Samuel had once given him, a chance, a meal, and someone who believed they were worth the effort. And so the story closes not with a wedding, but with a lesson far more valuable than any vow spoken at an altar. You never truly know whose quiet sacrifice built the person standing in front of you. The driver, the waiter, the cleaner, the stranger who seems replaceable to the world, they might be the very reason someone you love became who they are. Treat everyone with the same respect you'd give someone whose importance you already know. Because character isn't revealed in how you treat people who can help you. It's revealed in how you treat people you think never could. If this story touched you, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and share it with someone who needs this reminder today. Thank you for watching until the very end.